For other faith traditions, we have some of the diversity within this kind of a hemispheric family of religious traditions. So the Haitian tradition, the Spanish Caribbean, Cuban and Puerto Rican, and the African American branches of this. And then I should also add another sort of point of internal diversity. I won't say much about this, and I'll leave it for Babatoni to say more, but it's important to also note that within the Yoruba Lukumi or Spanish Caribbean tradition, there's an incredibly important sort of sub-branch or field of the Ifa tradition, and Babatoni is an Ifa priest or Babalao, which is like I'll leave it to him to say more about that. But that's important to flag as well as part of the kind of internal diversity of this religious world. We've already heard from Gran. Gran, do you want to say any more about Bazile? Or do we want to, maybe let's go on and hear some from Sheriden and Babatoni, and then we can come back for questions for everybody. Unless you want to add a little bit more about Bazile, or Bazile is the, sorry.
I love that event. It made me remember my ancestors. I find love in it. That's why I'm always do that very every. And then what is most important is the balance. I think it's very important for everyone here to have a balance in life, to know what to do, mostly good. Like I said, the dark and inside, that the power, I love get power. Yes, that's.
Babatoni, Sheriden? I have no preference for who.
Well, first I want to thank Dr. Henry Goldschmidt and Dr. Liza Patterson for a very good presentation this morning. And obviously, Dr. Goldschmidt has provided this venue of the Interfaith Center, and my prestigious colleagues to my right and left. I have a 3-point outline to keep me on track. 12 minutes, right, Henry?
Give or take.
I'm long-winded, so I have to put this in there.
It's like the hardest part of my job is cutting off faith leaders.
As I was sharing with Liza, I live the tradition, but to hear articulated in an academic form is actually refreshing. Because the operational language actually opens up your consciousness to different levels, to how it's supposed to work, right? Well, let me share with you my faith, ancestral traditions, and relationship with the Orisha that shapes my work in the community as a community leader and social activist. First, faith morphs into conviction. Faith morphs into conviction, just like I know gravity, the law of gravity. If I let go of my iPhone, it's going to fall. There's a law of gravity. Well, I don't have faith in gravity. I have conviction. I know gravity is a law. When one lives one's tradition, you start to see that faith morphs into conviction, where I know and let Bazile respond to me. My Ifa responds. There's this interactive relationship that actually becomes intuitive. So I need to clear that up, and it's actually quite refreshing to put it that way. Okay, faith becomes conviction. And as we live in our times, I like to quote Ram Dass, as the veils of illusion become more transparent, My convictions help me recognize the limitations of identifying solely with thoughts, feelings, and experiences of the present-day human society and culture. Have we noticed current events recently? How the veil is becoming removed from our eyes, and we're starting to see certain hypocrisies and inconsistencies in our society? Well, my faith becomes conviction. We start to see that before the mass media portrays it to us. Okay? So there's this idea that our faith helps us align with the real laws of the universe, not just La Madre Tierra, not just Mother Earth, but the universe. And then in our society, our divine relationship with the Orisha and ultimately Ifa helps us see through the contradictions of the human experience and the cognitive dissonance that many of us human beings hold. Two things in our head that don't match up. So in that context, my faith becomes conviction. The second there is my ancestral traditions. Well, ultimately, all of us as human beings are connected to an ancestral tradition. We learn this from the Odu Hunda Wari, where Baba Orumila says, please give praise to your Isheshe before you praise in your Orisha. Baba, what is my Isheshe? Olodumare is your Isheshe. God Almighty is your Isheshe. Your own Orieleta, your head is your Isheshe. Your mother is your Isheshe. Your father is your Isheshe. Your reproductive organs are your Isheshe. Your maternal lineage is your Isheshe. Your paternal lineage is your Isheshe. Give praise to your Isheshe before you praise in the Orisha. That's 7 levels that we give praise to. And then we move on to praising the Orisha. So that tells us as human beings that we all have an ancestral responsibility to give praise to our ancestors. After God Almighty, after your own head, your mom, your pop, whether they're here in the earth or in the next world. And then your maternal lineage and then paternal lineage. Remember, we're here on Mother Earth. Mother Earth. And the next level is this connection with the Orisha is beyond intellect. In fact, I was sharing with Dr. Booker. It's beyond intellect. It's visceral. When she greeted me, I saw her Orisha. I said, oh my God, you're glowing with Boba's energy. That's not intellectual. I actually see and feel. See? So we want to get that out the way. The academic form is great. But when you start to live this, it becomes visceral. Beyond, Carl Jung described the divinities as archetypes, or actually the archetypes as divinities. And all societies have archetypes. The father archetype, the mother archetype, the warrior, and the scholar, the priest, the healer. And that's an intellectual approach, and that's good. But in my experience, it's beyond intellect. It's visceral, feeling. That's what I wanted to share with you. How we doing with time, Henry? Good. I gotta keep tabs on myself. Discuss an example of social context African diaspora for religious life in New York. Discuss an example of a social context. A social context. We can split the hair. We're going to concentrate on water.
It's lovely to have an Ifa priest parse the language of my emails.
Keeps me on track. We work together, teamwork. First of all, I wrote this down. I contemplated on this. African diaspora religions in New York City can be understood within the framework of distinct regional variances within a general theme. Distinct regional variances within a general theme. When I went to Nigeria for my Ifa ordination, boy was I tickled. We landed in Lagos, which is a metropolitan area, to drive to Oshobo. And then we started hearing conversations. Well, you know, in Abiyakuta, they do things a little different. And then in Ilefe, you know, they do things a little different. But wait a minute, this sounds familiar. Regional variants on the same thing. I hear the Hindus have a very interesting parallel also. They all practice Hinduism, but regional variances within a general theme. We see that in New York City. Okay? So, we'll keep it at that. As scholars and educators here, you can wrap your head around that one. Okay? And moving along, my living experience, I have two flavors going on. Three, actually. I came to the religion because in my familial lineage from Puerto Rico, my grandaunt was a matriarch and a spiritista, Afro-Puerto Rican. Our lineage was a spiritista. And within that venue, we connected to our African lineage and our indigenous lineage. The two lineages that experienced a lot of oppression in Puerto Rico. But from that young age exposure to that, I learned that I had a path within a spiritual context. Fast forward, New York City, Puerto Rican migration to New York. Puerto Ricans and Cubans living together in El Barrio, Spanish Harlem in the 40s. Cuban culture, because of the size of Cuba and the strength of Cuba and Cuban culture, provided sort of like a role model for many Puerto Ricans, especially in the preservation of African consciousness. Machito and his Afro-Cuban Orchestra, that was the name of his group in the 40s. Nobody acknowledged Afro. So, to put it in a nutshell, many Puerto Ricans in New York grew up listening to Afro-Cuban music, because that's our music too. And that opened the way for me to actually embrace the Orisha almost 60 years ago. Listening to music that was quote-unquote folkloric, just drums and chants, and also jazzed up mambo style for the Palladium with themes of the Orisha. Singing to Changono, Batalan, Babaluaye, and the Palladium. So those two avenues brought me to the Lukumi faith. La Regla de Ocha, which means the Orisha order, the Lukumi faith of Cuba. And I was ordained to a Batala 34, 35 years ago, a long time ago. I didn't have no gray hair. In my path, I wanted to go to the source. And I started studying Ifa in the late 80s, actually with your uncle in Ocha. Ifa is the philosophical foundation of the Orisha tradition. It's the philosophical, intellectual foundation of the Orisha tradition. And I went to Nigeria for ordination 11 years ago. So that's my story. Now, do I see regional variance? Yes, I live it. Because as Dr. McAllister described very well, the Roman Catholic context where the Lukumi faith was protected and grew, prospered, the Roman Catholic context and the Protestant context of North America were quite different. And all the cultural, social, and legal idiosyncrasies of both cultures flavor the tradition. Traditions. That's That's why we have regional variances. Okay, then you add another dynamic in Brazil. You have a Catholic Portuguese dynamic, not Catholic Spanish. So we have to expect regional variances over the general theme. Does that make sense? Okay. How am I doing for time? Couple of minutes, okay. Experiences with living through my immigration history of communities I worked with. By the way, when you think about immigration history, I don't have to go to a book. I just speak to some of my elders. I'll give you a case in point. My elder has my job. She's gonna be 99 years old. She has 50 some odd years of Orisha. She lives in the Bronx, South Bronx, in a little apartment. She's like a living embodiment of Orisha. When I want to know about Cuban migration to New York, prior to the revolution in 1959, I talked about it. And when I want to know about dynamics in Cuba, by the way, the Constitution of Cuba, I believe, was written and enacted in 1940. Prior to that, it was all Spanish colonial laws. She was born, if you do the math, she's 99, it's almost 100 years ago. So she grew up under quasi-Spanish colonial laws in Havana. When I want to know about history, I talk to elders. And then, of course, all the other groups I work with, first and second generation Cuban Americans, before and after the revolution, you get a handle on history and immigration dynamics. That's very important. Our New Yorker experience, first, second, and third generation, very interesting. Okay, then of course Nigerian Yoruba, and we have African Americans, and we have Anglo-Caribbean Americans, Anglo-Americans. So Mexicans and Colombians and Garifuna from Central America, these are folks I relate to. And there's immigration dynamics in each group, and generational dynamics for each group. So actually what I'm encouraging all of you as educators, you want to ask questions and interview people and get all this oral history out into the open so you really understand what's going on with you. And when you teach your students, you open up their worlds. We start to break down the stereotypes and the pejoratives that we're familiar with, right? Make sense? How we doing time?
That's as good a place to end it as any, if
Okay.
you are comfortable with that.
You're welcome.
Hi, so it's an honor to follow Tony, and he's my elder, so that was why I looked at him and said, of course he should be going first. So whatever I say, hopefully will just add to the wonderful presentation that you just made. As you mentioned, I'm a priestess of Orion in the Indian tradition. And I come from both an academic and a practitioner background, which, as he sort of referenced, those two can collide with each other. I have to say, when I was going through my PhD program, it was very hard to balance those two because you have a sort of intellectualization of something, the logical things don't function in the same way, right? So you're looking for answers. In the academic world, they look for answers and extract answers in a different way from how you're being asked to operationalize yourself within a religion, right? And the way that your interaction with your ancestors, your interaction with your Orisha is taking place. A lot of what we do is about developing what my godfather calls situational intelligence. And this is part of the reason why you see so much regional variance, because it's not about having a static canon. even when we have Odu and Ifa, as my godfather, because I have a godfather in Risha, a godfather in Ifa as well. I don't want to get too complicated in that explanation. But one of the Babalaos in my lineage was explaining, he says, even when you have Odu, it's energy that is constantly manifesting itself in the world, right? And so,
I'm sorry, could you explain, or maybe Tony, just a quick definition of Odu?
do you want to?
Sure. Thank you. Odu is a corpus of knowledge. No, we're teamwork here. Teamwork. Any chalk? Chalk. Odu is a corpus of knowledge, a space that you, as Humila says, pigeonhole areas where cosmic knowledge resides. Pigeonholes, compartmentalization of cosmic knowledge. I'm going to write down, draw the Odu Oshetura, Oshe, right? Tura, left. This is very much a symbol of elevation, so that our consciousness is open. See, we have a diagram of zeros and ones and twos. This is computer language. The primal computer language is ultimately flat. And from this come stories and verses and advice and refrains and taboos and histories.
And so as that energy manifests in the world, there are stories, but there are also stories that continue to be added on because we are living manifestations of Odu, right? We as human beings and the earth in general is a constant manifestation of that cosmic energy moving and transforming and evolving from the beginning of time to the present, right? So a lot of what we practice is based on not necessarily forming something static, but developing situational intelligence so that we can achieve the balance that Gran spoke of, right? This constant search for one to live your destiny here in this world, because we believe in the idea of Ayambo, or Ili is your head, your Godhead that you're born with from heaven. You decided on what it is that you were coming to do here on earth. You decided this was God before you came. And so your mission is to sort of achieve that as best as possible, right? And all the lessons and the trials and tribulations that come along with that destiny that you decided on. And there's a process of maintaining a balance, a constant, there's not a moral, I want to say morality is discovered in the balance, right? So there's not a general prescription that's given to the entire congregation, so to speak, but there is an idea of each person has something that they come here to do. Each person has their own essential makeup, their nature, and the purpose of our practice is to find out what you as a person need to do to achieve your balance, right? In relationship to everything around you, in relationship to your community, in relationship to the world, so that you can live your best life, do your best, make your best contribution to society. So that's why my godfather, this idea of situational intelligence has been so, we have a refrain, actually in Sheriden, one man's meat is another man's poison, right? So the idea that what may be good for that person may not be good for you. So this is the whole idea of the divinations that we do, and also the dynamicism of having several orisha that are worshipped within the Luguli tradition. We believe in one God, but that there are several orisha, more than several. In Nigeria, they say there's 401 to represent the infinitesimal nature of orisha, right? And that each are manifestations of God and that energy. So God is the totality, then the Orisha are aspects of that totality, right? So it allows you to tap into different aspects of the world, because the entire world is divine in itself, right? Everything is a manifestation or projection outward of that essential core essence, which is God. So also big for us is the veneration of our ancestors, and that's another reason why you see, I like to think that we see a lot of regional variation is because Isheshe is an unbroken lineage, right? And so I've heard people theorize this in several different ways, like in the academic world of, there's African-inspired religion, what we practice, some people say what we practice here is African-inspired, or it's African-based. And so there's different theories that have to do with how we look at issues of diaspora, right, and social change. But if you really look at the core of what we do, there is no way to speak about our religion without recognizing Africa, because Isheshe is the concept of something that has been unbroken, which means that whatever it is that we have, it has been unbroken, even though there is change that occurs along the way, because we have situational intelligence. There is an aspect to Isheshe that means that there's always a direct lineage back to Africa. I could not have Orisha if my ancestors, and when I say my ancestors, I'm going to also elaborate on the concept of lineage in the tradition. We have something that goes back to Africa. And I think it's something important to highlight, because it's as you see variations of the Orisha religions sort of evolving and emerging and continuing to be practiced here, there is a greater recognition of Africa, as Robert Tony was saying, and people wanting to go to Africa and see, sometimes people do rituals over there, but also it's about seeing the source and where things have come from, how things have evolved, and how there are things that we can learn from each other on both sides, right? So in that process, there's a recognition that this is a global religion, and we're, because of the ability to travel, there's, you're doing something similar. If you do this in Puerto Rico, you do this in Cuba, in Brazil, in Trinidad, in Nigeria, there's second and third diasporas around the world. But I don't want to get too far off. The concept of ancestral lineage. So I'm originally from California. I grew up in Los Angeles. I was born on Sunset Boulevard, literally in the hospital across the street from the Scientology Center. Literally. And so this is not necessarily anything that I imagined for myself. I grew up in a house that, unbeknownst to me, I grew up in a house with a lot of African art, and actually funny, because I just came back from Haiti, my father was telling me that there's Haitian art in my house. I didn't even know that it was Haitian. He was like, well, yeah, the statue that I bought, he was like, I bought that in Port-au-Prince back in 1972. Anyways, but he was saying that he had traveled. There's different stories around things in the house, and you don't really know that, like outside my bedroom door, my mother had put a photograph of Deenps, which is the concept of twins, and Imitobu is the child that follows after you have twins, right? And I didn't know what this, and I don't even really think that she knew. She just was putting art in the house and stuff. So fast forward, I leave home, I'm away, and then I don't want to go too far off into the journey, but basically I was in Brazil on vacation and ended up at a ceremony because a friend of a friend was being initiated, and before I knew it, I was being thrown into the circle. I was like, oh no, we're not doing this, bye. sort of, ran off, and the Pajasanta was like, oh no, she needs to come back, and my friend and I were like, nah, we're not coming back. So there was a pull for me to come into this, and it wasn't until my grandmother died, and then I started having dreams, and I literally saw my entire lineage, like all my mother's cousins, back through my grand, like back. And they were saying to me, we're counting on you. And I think this is important, and literally within a year from that happening, within a year of my grandmother dying, and then me starting to have these dreams, I was in the door and I was initiated. And this wasn't something that I necessarily, imagined for myself, but it's, one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that a lot of what we do in dealing with situational intelligence is also about the process of healing. And for myself, 10 years out, because I've been 10 years, I'll be 10 years initiated as a priestess of Baba next month. A lot of it is clearing up things that have happened for my family in my lineage. And so there is trauma that many of us are still dealing with. And in my case, this has fallen on my shoulders to do for my family, to help my family. I want to say also that there's, the issue of bloodline is very important. I was having this conversation with two Senegalese friends of mine because I don't want to go too far off, but dreams are very important, and I'm sure that they say the same thing and will too as well. I had a dream about a woman. It was very clear, very, very clear, and I didn't know she wasn't an Orisha. And so I started talking to some Senegalese friends of mine, and they're like, oh, that's da-da-da-da-da. Like I described like how she looked and everything, right? And they're Muslim, but in Senegal there's a lot of mixing of what are, I would say, indigenous African religions and Islam. And they said, oh, if you don't recognize her and do certain things, it can cause problems. And it's not just about that particular spirit, but it's the fact of, because what we do is very much based on blood lineage, there is a carriage of sorts. I would say that, you take care of the spirit so that they take care of the family. And then what has happened with the transatlantic slave trade is that a lot of people, and then this turns into a human rights issue as well, is that we were forcibly taken away from our religious practices, which are ancestral based. And so you have a traumatic divorce from what it is that you used to do. And that can cause we call it, sort of spiritual problems. And so I want to sort of stress that, because in doing what we do, you are enabling the ancestors to continue to work through you and work in the life of your family, but also to bless the work that you do here on this earth. And when they are not recognized, that is when certain problems can occur. There's also a concept of ancestral lineage within our Orisha-based traditions that comes from the initiation process as well. It's not just a matter of I went to the supermarket and I picked some things off of the shelf and I bought them and now I've got it, I possess it, and it's done. That's, and it's I think a huge problem to stress, because there is so much of a commodification of African-based religions now, because it's become sort of part of, I want to say like a new age, spiritual, I want to find a spiritual path. Oh, this seems nice. Let me do this, right?
We have drums and candles.
Right. When you come to this, you literally become connected to this concept, in this concept of Isheshe, you become connected to everyone that came before you. And I don't say that lightly, because like, you know, like when they're doing the laboratorio, right? I don't want to go too far, right? But you know, when there's or laboratorio or Ita, right? When it talks about the energy that is coming, sometimes that energy is not for you.
That's right.
And it can be for, it could, you know, it could be for your, like your blood family, like your mother, your father, your siblings, or it could be for your godparent or your god sibling, and everybody that is connected to you through that spiritual lineage that you've now joined. And so it's an important thing to keep in mind, because you know you now have two families, and this is why when we start our ceremonies, we call not only our ancestors of our blood lineage, meaning like, you know, who you're literally birthed from, but also the ancestors of your Ocha house, your Orisha house, right? And for me, that, you know, our lineage comes from Madrina Wana, Ominika Ibaye. She was of Barbadian descent, Cuban-born, she used to be she was a domestic worker, maid to Steve Allen's wife, the host of the Tonight Show. Ended up immigrating to New York in the 50s. Then she has godchildren that she made here in New York, and she moved to Puerto Rico. I recently was on Facebook, and I was talking, I realized that I was like, oh my gosh, you're my god cousin or something, with somebody who was Puerto Rican who lives in Texas now. And literally when the lineage just spreads out, you know, and it's like a tree with like many branches. What else would I say in terms of how am I doing with time?
Minute or two.
Okay, minute or two. You know, the other thing that I'd like to say too, just in terms of being educators that are working with children K-12, 3 points. One, I think that you can't study African-based religions or really fully engage with them without knowing the history of the transatlantic slave trade. And that's why I really appreciated what you said when you opened by talking about, you know, we are the descendants of those who were kidnapped from West and Central African empires. There is a significant human rights issue around our ability to practice, and the fact that many of us have continued these traditions under conditions of oppression, of persecution, of pursuit from police. And not just here, you can even talk about it in Cuba. There have been well-documented instances of people having ritual items confiscated by the government, and being put in jail or threatened with being put in jail for practicing. This goes back from the colonial period to the present here in the United States. You know, there are different variations of, different parts of the country were colonized by different, the British, the French, and the Spanish were in different parts. For me personally, my mother's lineage would come from Louisiana by way of the Caribbean. So there are different layers to this story.
Sheriden or Babatoni are different. I know there are men and women ordained priests very much equally, but are there other meaningful distinctions in the roles that men and women play in religious leadership?
Well, if I may contribute here, the way I was raised, I concur with Dr. Mondesire, because of the disruption of the reproductive cycle of women. That's what I was taught. But at the same time, there's a layer of machismo, where this is territorial. This is yang, masculine energy from the top. And this is no place for women to participate. So when I studied Bata 41 years ago, I learned that when you play these drums, you're gonna feel your bowels will loosen up. Clinically speaking, that's what happens because of the vibration, and then you lock into other rhythms that are beyond circadian. So if a female is in that position, especially playing the ya drum, the mother drum, she can disrupt the menstrual cycle. So there's logical reasons for it, as Mondesire described, and also cultural, the machismo aspect.
Yeah.
And it's hard to cut through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a struggle for women in the society. And as you know, we are all came from women, but we end up worship a man God, right? Makes no sense. And, I mean, so many. So, I think even when you play the drum, you see the mother drum. Obviously, you have a mother drum in there. In the wall of that mother drum, it's unbelievable. Because while the drums are working together, the child, the father, the cousin, they are doing something specific, but the mother, she's free to do whatever she wants. And what she's really doing is keep the family together, giving them comfort. So, like I said, my teaching is to respect the cultures, tradition, because it's all different and unique. But I had a lot of great women drummers, including my daughter. So, in fact, in terms of priest and priestess, in voodoo, most of us would rather go to a member, to a priestess, if we have to choose, than a priest.
Member in some ways has more prestige or authority than
I mean, naturally in nature and voodoo. So it's like the same thing when you have two trees. When you have two mango trees, the one that will produce mango grow, that's the mother, and the one who doesn't. So we just go by nature and the respect. So that's why I was talking about the spiritual freedom. In terms of labor, voodoo is resistance, voodoo is love. We know that everything the Creator has created, they're all good. So based on how you use it, it's all individual. With this you can do good or bad, but it's never the bamboo. They would say, oh, it's great to me up. So in a way, I respect people, cultures, the beliefs and all that, but
Sure, can you want to add anything on this? Gender issues or?
Yeah, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's the Odu that talks about the relationship between men and women, or the masculine and the feminine in the world. Because that's where marriage is born. Tivada, okay, not deep, so Tivada. Right, so there's, even in the Odu, there's stories that talk about the I don't want to say conflict, but even in the creation of the universe, there is the masculine and the feminine, right? And so this whole world comes out of the relational development or evolution between masculine and feminine. So that is, I think there's two levels to it. One, there's in practice what happens, and yes, there is culturally, and not just in the religion, but just outside of it, there's been an overarching patriarchy that comes from just the society in general that automatically has its way in somewhere in the religion, right? But then on a philosophical level, that's all part of just the manifestation of the world. And we're in a stage right now where you're seeing the feminine pushback, right? You see the things that are happening in society around the world. You're seeing that transformation. My personal Orisha is an Orisha that deals with women's issues, and defending women. And so if you ask me, my take on gender and religion is going to be very different from somebody else, because I'm speaking from that that perspective of her energy and the stories about her, and I'm living out that life, you know what I mean?
Could you say a little, I know this could go on for hours or days, but a little briefly about Oba and her story and why that story has been sort of meaningful or inspiring to you?
Well, okay, no, I mean, I can say something, but I think Oba was the first, you know, in the quote-unquote mythology, right? Oba was the first wife of Shango. Shango is the Orisha of fire. He was a big king, the fourth king of Oyo, and Oba was his wife. But before becoming his wife, she was already royalty. She was the only one of his wives that was already royalty, and she had her own land. And in marrying him, she had there were a lot of problems. Like, you know, I don't know, I'm trying to draw an analogy to something. So there's some people who say that she cut off her ear to try to please him. And then there are other people that said that this was a ruse so that she could escape from the marriage, right? And so you'll hear different stories. But really, the Pataki is about the evolution of the relationship between men and women. What are your expectations in marriage, right? Because Oba was like, what am I getting out of this? I'm already royalty. I already have my own money. I help you build everything that you have. I don't need you. Or maybe I do need you. I don't need you. Maybe I do need you, right? It's those aspects of, right? So what are you looking for? What type of respect are you looking for in a partnership? What is the role of a wife? What is the role of a husband, right? Because Oba in the story, she was a woman that could run everything even if Shango wasn't there. Because she came from that background. She came from living inside of the king's home. So she knew the workings of politics, how to do things, how to run a kingdom, how to manage money, right? And so that was something she brought to the marriage. But what is the recognition that she gets in that marriage, right? And so that's part of what she deals with, right? I mean, there are other aspects, but very much her pataki is about, you know, women, and also about balance inside of relationships and marriages, right? And so you can talk about it outside of the male-female context. You could also talk about it in terms of societal relationships. Situations of being oppressed, right? Situations of feeling that, you know, you are, you know, groups that feel that they are under-recognized, underappreciated, right? And so what is the rising of consciousness that occurs, right? When you come to a point of like, hey, I'm contributing this, and so therefore, you know, I can be afforded a certain amount of respect for the contribution that I make to this piece, right? So those are all of the things that, energy-wise, those are the things that she deals with, and she was a very important Orisha during the period of slavery as well, because in Cuba, she was the Orisha that you sing to so that you won't be enslaved anymore, right?
Other questions? Yeah.
So we've heard a lot today about the healing ceremonies and the getting in balance and the role of priests and priestesses to help with that. Are there practices of just coming together to pray that aren't initiation rites or healing rites, like, let's say, what the typical Sabbath service in Western traditions, just group worship, that it's not designed necessarily to have a purpose other than that?
Yeah, definitely. You know, again, there's not a tendency to necessarily just like have like a church that's out on the street because of the history of secrecy, but also because you don't just invite, you know, open the doors for necessarily for someone that you may not know to come in, right? So usually people that do show up for ceremonies, like it's a drumming, it's because you are either part of the house and you may not be fully initiated as a priest, but you know, you might have sort of like an I would say an entry level relationship, right? Where there are different stages of receiving, different stages of initiation. Or you might be a friend of somebody that's a part of that house, which is again how I ended up at this religious house in Brazil when I was there. And then there are a few public ceremonies that do take place, like there's the Yemoshad Beach, which happens first Sunday in September, which is a public event. There's drumming out at the beach to worship the ocean. And then I believe that the Haitian Vodou community like a few weeks later has similar for Adwe, right? Before it?
Yes.
So that is
ceremonies in August.
Okay.
And Gogo has also been doing a ranger ceremony in Prospect Park for
But am I right also that each of the Orisha or the Loa, the spirits each have an annual feast day, right? So within a house, there's not like a sort of weekly Sabbath service, which is kind of what I was asking, but there's a regular annual calendar,
Right.
you know, and if it's a sort of large, busy house, you know, there'll be a number of major ceremonies each year, you know, on the feast day of the different Orisha or Loa.
Right. I mean, I would agree. But sometimes I think because of the situation here in the United States is that those are like the actual public celebration of that. The feast days has become less. Like in Cuba, they used to do it. You know, the Yomosha festival that they have, which is syncretized with Regla, like people would come out, you know, and they would celebrate it in conjunction with the Catholic saint, right? Because there's more of I want to say a larger consensus of people, a critical mass of people that were practicing. Whereas I see here, because people are still not accustomed to being recognized within the greater society, that even those feast day celebrations will happen within sort of closed circles, but they do exist. And then other instances that people have like sort of larger gatherings, as if the Orisha mandated, it's been sort of divined upon that a particular ceremony needs to take place. They will send out invitations to people in the community to come for that celebration. You know, and then in other places like in Brazil and in Nigeria, you see like huge celebrations that have developed for certain feast days, you know. Whereas it's like literally thousands of people, and it's a tremendous amount of work for the priests that are involved, because you're now dealing on a massive international scale, having a lot of visitors, I would stress too that there's an environmental issue that occurs around it, because sometimes people come and they're thinking this is like tourism, right? And it's like, you know, like you've been to a party where there's like a couple hundred people, and then afterwards you're like, oh my God, how am I gonna clean this up afterwards, right? And people have littered all over the place, and it's sort of antithetical to what religion stands for, because ultimately at the end of the day we're venerating not the forces of nature, like the aspects of nature, right? So, you know, there's two sides to this.
Other questions? We have a few minutes still. Yes.
I have a question about the ritual attire. The hats and the hair, and we have all the neck things around your neck. There might be more that I can't see.
I think it's original, the hair and the beard, because I think that gives to us. We have to keep it. With the beard, I can't. do nothing wrong because people know me. I'm very popular.
But it's important to see, two colleagues and friends, both voodoo priests,
Let me
dressed very
say
differently.
a little bit about
Yeah, sure.
Wakaima is very important for me in Haitian, because that's the first ceremony make our people free from slavery. Why I do this in New York? I see it is very necessary to let the young youths, Haitian, from Haiti come young, and the Haitian kids when here. It's very important to let them know our ancestors was fighting very much to make us free. That's why it's important to do Wakaima every year.
Sheriden or Bazile, do you want to say anything about that? This is part of the question about sort of which, religious or symbolic dress, the necklaces that Sheriden has, and I think Tony as well, and sort of very symbolic within the tradition. You want to say a word or two?
If I may, we talked about coding. These color-coded, but as human beings, there's one thing about intellectualization, there's another thing when you see something visceral. It's color-coded. It goes right into your subconscious. So the colors of Ifa remind me very directly of my relationship with Mother Earth, Ground Bead, and my relationship with Orunmila, the green bead. Orumila's directive to human beings is to grow in this incarnation like a plant, always seeking the sun, seek the source. The source is your destiny, and the only way to get this to grow through thick and thin, and you incorporate sunlight as chlorophyll. As chlorophyll. See? So I said all of that because I see my green bead and I have my green shirt on. Or Batala, my Orisha, is symbolic as white purity. White is purity. In this world, it's hard to be pure. But if your heart is pure and your intentions are pure, you're on the path. In my avatar, my appellation, I like that word, appellation of Obatala, when he incarnated and to try to bring rules to the world, that incarnation, he was a warrior, young and very warlike, because he was sent to the world, put order in the world, and clean up that mess. And here's a machete if you have to use it. So he has an aspect of fiery. That's where the red bead comes in. You see, so having said all that, we're reminded with color codes, and by the way, the beads are symbolic of royalty. And it's not just our culture. See, we start to see the universality of bead work and color coding, and then, by the way, they're consecrated with herbal fluids and so forth. So they, through incantation and the releasing of the power of plants, we further can synchronize with coded, our shared coded power. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's great.
I would add, in terms of, as you mentioned about headgear and something like that, there are a lot of instances where we cover our heads, because the head, the top of your head is considered the most sacred part of your body, because it's the seat of your consciousness and your destiny. And so a lot of what is done is to align, right, with the energetic forces, right, from the earth up through the crown of your head. So there's actually a lot of similarities to, if I will, the concept of Kundalini in yoga and Hinduism. If you look at some of the philosophies around that. So covering the head is really important. And I would say, again, going back to, since you are teachers, dealing with kids that come in who might have just gone through ceremonies or an initiation, they may have their head covered. And there have been kids who've gone to school who have problems, and I know I was speaking to one priestess, and she said, well, I had to explain to the teacher that it was like when a Jewish child comes to school with a yarmulke on their head, that you cannot ask my child to take the head tie off of her head, because this is part of her religious practice to cover the top of her head, especially at this point in time, right? Because it's about protecting your energy, protecting the energy forces, right, that you're dealing with. Because again, that concept of balance and healing, sometimes when you go through ceremonies, the ceremony that was done, it takes time for that energy to sit on you, to settle and to heal. And so in order to protect the person, it's prescribed to then cover the top of your head, don't touch people, right? And I know this sounds weird, and it's something else really important to keep in mind, but it's not because the other person is bad, but it's about closing off your energy for a certain period of time, right? So like new initiates, when they go to the bodega, say for instance, to go buy like something, they have to put the money on the counter, and then the person has to pick the money up from the counter. Like they cannot hand things, because it's handing things or touching people that would transfer energy, just like to use a good example. What's a good example? I'm gonna go there. Like, in sexual relations, that's a transfer of energy when you touch somebody else, right? And so, that's an extreme example, but it's an example of the philosophy behind it, right? That we all embody certain energies, and that at certain points in time, it's better for you to close off your energy so that you can heal and you can sort of sit in the healing that's been done for you. And I know also about the white. White is also a color that's used a lot. One, because of the issue of purity, right? Because of the concept of, in Africa we use a lot of like palm oil in the food, and so the test, right, of the purity of the white cloth is not to get it dirtied by the red palm oil, right? I mean, this is an actual, right? This is an actual thing, but also there's a science behind it, because white reflects off of it, right? It reflects, white cloth reflects everything off of it, whereas, and darker colors, right? Actually, black, like jet black is, it's a composite of all the colors of the spectrum. So there's a science behind it. So when you wear black, you are absorbing everything. And when you want to protect yourself or to sort of deflect off what white deflects. So there's definitely, and both can, and neither are considered good or bad, right? Because black can be used for other things if it has its symbolic importance within the religion as well. But just, you might see sometimes somebody who practices Ukumi or is a Orisha follower, I don't, whether Brazilian Kabule or Nigerian follower, they might be wearing all white, and that's, the reason behind it.
May I add something?
Very, very briefly.
Okay,
And I want to get one or two more questions.
Yeah, science. Thank you for bringing that up. The science of the color spectrum or the vibratory rates. Our tradition of folklore is based on science. It's physical science and metaphysical science. I'll leave it at that.
Charlie, would you hear?
Yeah, hopefully this is an easy one. I've heard several people use the term godfather and maybe godmother. And I'm wondering, of course, from some Protestant and Catholic traditions, there's one view of that. I'm just trying to understand what it is in this practice.
It's the role of a godmother or godfather, which is, I think, more of a term in the Spanish Caribbean and African American. It's not really the same term in Haiti, but the person who leads your initiation. It's on the one hand, it's a very simple question. On the other hand, it's got like deep.
If
It's
I could-
about genealogy. Yeah, well,
This is very good to understand. Think of Cuban society where our tradition survived. We have to remember Spanish colonial law. And Spanish colonial law was Roman Catholic, where church and state were hand in hand. And you had to be a practicing Catholic. So our tradition that survived in Cuba, by default, generation after generation, living in a Catholic society. Precisely. I was raised a Roman Catholic. So the idea of godmother, godfather, the child went to church first, got baptized by the Roman Catholic priest. Those cultural idiosyncrasies became part of our new tradition. See? So, therefore, padrino, madrina, godmother, godfather, those terms are still held.
but within an Ocha house, how would you define the role of the padrino or the very brief?
As spiritual leaders, spiritual father, spiritual mother.
Is it individual, like, does one, would you have a different one from the next person, or is it one person as a leader for your group?
I'm not clear that's the question.
Well, like in the Roman Catholic tradition, the parents might choose, close family members or friends to be the godparents. But I'm wondering if yours is more like literally a priest or someone who is the godfather that's spiritually for many people as opposed to one.
Those relationships evolve if one chooses to be ordained in a spiritual house, which is basically a family. One chooses to be an apprentice and a quasi-son, a quasi-daughter of that spiritual leader. And the relationship for the elder becomes actually more, in a sense, more responsible. That person that was the godparent becomes more responsible for the godchild than the biological parent. Because you intervene into their Akashic record, their karma.
Yeah, I'd like to say is that there's many different ways of doing things in terms of who you are individually. Like colors, blessing come in all colors. Like mystic power, you find that in any object. So some of us are chosen to be who we are. And when I say it's all individual, like even the question you asked, don't worry about this hair and stuff like that. I had doing that for 10 years, and I cut it off. Whatever the reason, but I'm saying is that you could be wearing stuff and that doesn't mean the value of it, or it could be for because you like it, you love, and all that. So like myself who have this, here, these are my tools, my weapons, the way I bring people together, the way I make people feel comfortable and stuff like that. So it's more than an instrument. So now, deep down inside, what is this? What's made this? How come this is the specific one that gives you specific sound? So in a way, I would just want to say like everything is not black and white. So when we in Haiti, when we talk about the voodoo civilization, the spiritual freedom, it's always indefinite. And that's why the way things run in my family, that doesn't mean it's the same in your family. It's that just like we almost have everything in common, but that little percentage keep us looking them different. So in a way, but a lot of things people are talking, a lot of things people are saying about voodoo, the miseducation and everything. These are the things that I have no idea of what they are talking about. So I would just want you to see a little bit like that. Like when people say I'm a Houngan, I've been very careful with the word Houngan, because when we say Houngan, people refer Houngan to one thing. You know, like a reputation, it's a type of Houngan, because a Houngan is a chief. You have a responsibility based on your duty. Could be spiritual, whatever you have to do, but it's the same thing when you say medicine. A dentist is a doctor. It's based on who you are, where you're coming from, and your occupation. So sometimes people just put everything in one basket, especially when we don't know what we are talking about.
One more question. I mean, I would love to stay here all day, but we can't. So, Imani, and then we have to thank these guys in a couple of minutes and have lunch.
You touched on it a little bit about like dreams. Can you speak to the significance of like dreams and vision and like voodoo and like if there's like certain people that may be born with that ability? Just anyone can touch on that.
Dreams are, I find voodoo more than any other traditions, that dreams are extremely important. It's how the Black community to the last. And that there are, in fact, rituals and there are herbs and medicines that are used to induce dreams as well, because that is where ancestral information comes from, or another way of transmitting knowledge and energy. One of the Ugandians spoke about being born in a tradition. It is believed that a sort of prenatal contract with Mare, with God, with Dieu, and part of the task of life of living is to step into the role of this commitment that you've made before you entered this plane. I was born Roman Catholic too, and I was an atheist most of my life, but I've been a priest for the past 18 years, and it was a very painful, very difficult struggle to do that. But I had to because of my dreams, because I realized I possessed a body of knowledge that made no sense to me. In fact, I told me his wife was the first priest I went to try to decipher and understand what is this? I mean, dreaming in languages I don't consciously speak. Oba came to me all the time. I didn't know who she was, what she wanted from me. And I was like, hey, you're scary. But all the Orisha came to me and told me what to do. And they taught me about ethics and mores and how I'm supposed to exist in the world. And sometimes there would be objects, go to a museum and something, it's spiritually charged. I would go to bed and that thing blew up. You know, it could be like the equivalent of an ant carrying a crumb of bread. That size to me, telling me you should do X, Y, and Z. You must learn the following thing. These are what is expected of you. And so a body of knowledge that because of the kasi, the break in the rhythm, because of the break in our traditions, the transatlantic slave trade, certain things that should have been normative practices for us, divination, a child is born, you know, cowrie shells or bones or other things are thrown down, so we know who that person is. We had to refigure all of that stuff out here. And again, amongst the regional variations is, you know, spirit will come to us and say, this is who you are. And we all have to understand who we are in our relationships to each other, and part of the way that message comes through is through dreaming. So it matters a great deal.
That's a good answer.
I'm going to say with all due respect to our official panelists, I think that is a fantastic note to end it on, this idea of Gran, our drummer as well, and Sheriden, Dr. Booker, Balatoni, thank you so much for joining us. We're running late, obviously, for very good reasons, but the schedule says 1:30 for the film, let's say 2 o'clock instead. So we'll meet right back here and we will start that fabulous documentary film about Voodoo in the Bronx exactly at 2 o'clock. See you guys in an hour and 10 minutes.
Thank you.
I'm already Good day. Good day. When you all tomorrow, like new aging, like yeah.
And anytime you send fire, then you're having
Yeah. How many times have you been to see this? I just started.
yeah,
The only thing is I get it like 8:30 in the morning to set it up. It starts at 9.
I can do that for you. Yeah, so just, no, but just like me at the front desk page.
Yeah.
With that? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'm happy to do that.
Because I mean, otherwise I've got to take it on 2
It's
trains,
so
kind of
hot.
two trains to get it back.
So hot. Let me
Thank
do
you
this.
so much. Yeah, I would be alright with that when I started packing. So
Yeah.
my room's
I really am perfect. I've been really proud of my packing. My whole trip is a total of almost 6 weeks. And I've had 3 climates. And I've got 1 bag.
Hey, yeah, that is amazing. Where else are you going?
I'm ending now, actually. We got it all on tape, right?
Yeah, I'll put those, like the Bebe ritual and stuff like that as separate videos and stuff if you want to use them. So just, you know, you don't have to like...
watch it at Facebook.
Yeah, oh, okay, yeah.
I can get the Facebook page or something.
Yeah, you're on Facebook?
I haven't requested.
Well, and yeah, they'll end up on the Ancestral YouTube channel.
Perfect. And what's the channel called on here?
It's called
On Facebook?
on Facebook it's called the 2016, I forget what it's called.
Summer Institute?
Yeah, 2016 Summer Institute.
Okay.
Friend me, friend me, I can add you.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh yeah. Oh, we don't have